Hey everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of the complete series walkthrough where we're creating the game Pong. In the previous video we went over the coin mechanics as well as the basic enemy plane logic, and in this tutorial specific video we're going to be going over how to spawn those planes, and so that's what we're going to be covering in this video completely. Hopefully it won't be too long of a video, but what we are going to be covering is the spawning logic. So we're spawning both types of plane with one actor, and we want to make sure that it's easily editable, so that way we can change the spawn time or things like that. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so here I am in GameSolid with the project that we were using in the last video, and if you remember, we've gone ahead and added two different actors for the planes, and one that moves from the left to the right and from the other one that moves from the right to the left. Let's go ahead and preview really quick to see what we did. And there we go, and so they're just moving at random speeds, and you'll notice though that if we do hit them, nothing happens yet because we haven't told the game what to do when we do hit those planes, and so we're going to be covering that in the next video, but for this video we are going to go over the spawning logic, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a new actor, and we're going to call it enemy spawner. Go ahead and click return or enter on your keyboard to go ahead and apply the name. Let's go ahead and enter the actor by double clicking on it, and I'm just going to give it a quick color. Again, I'm just blocking out the mechanics, and adding graphics and everything will come later, though we don't really need a graphic for this actor. I'm going to go ahead and change the size of this actor. We can change it to like 30 and 30. We don't need it to be big. And so now we are going to have to create a couple of self attributes. And if you remember in the previous lesson when we worked with the coin actors, we didn't spawn the coins. We just created a self attribute in there so that way we could distinguish between the two actors on the scene, which is kind of what we're going to be doing with this as well. There are going to be multiple spawn actors on the screen, and so since we want to spawn all of these planes within one actor, we are going to have to distinguish between the actors on the scene, and so that's why we need this self attribute right here. So I'm going to go ahead and create an integer attribute, and we're going to call it which side, and set it to 1 initially. And then we will need an extra self attribute, and it's going to be a Boolean type, which remember is just a true or false value. It can either be true or it can either be false, and so we're going to go ahead and create a Boolean attribute, and we're going to call it just spawned, and we're going to set it to true initially. So let's go ahead and create a rule here, and we are going to say when self, and self is just the name of the actor, when self just spawned is true, so this rule is going to fire when that value is true, which if you look down here it's initially set to true, so this should fire right away. When it is true, we're going to go ahead and change the value back to false, but we want to make sure that we give a delay, that way that as you'll see later on, that way the planes won't come really quickly. We won't be spawning a lot of planes really quickly where it makes it impossible for the player to survive the game, and so we are giving a brief time delay so that way they have a chance to actually rack up some points. So we're going to drag a timer behavior into the rule here, and we're going to say after. It's initially set to every, but we want this rule to, the timer to trigger after half a second, which is 0.5 seconds, and we're going to make sure that run to completion is checked. We're going to go ahead and drag a change attribute into the timer, and we're going to change self.whichSpawned just spawned to false. And so there we go. So when it's true, after half a second, we are changing it to false. So there we go. That's our first rule right here, and we're going to go ahead and create a new rule by clicking the Create Rule button in the top left, or you can also scroll down and navigate to the rule behavior in the library and drag it into the logic stack. With this rule, we're going to say when attribute self just spawned is false, so this is going to go ahead and fire when the value is false, which if you look right here, it changes to false after half a second of being true. So when it's false, what we're going to do is drag another timer behavior into the rule, and again we're going to change it to after, and we're going to say like after 1 second, run to completion, spawn actor. Drag the spawn actor behavior into the timer, and the spawn actor does exactly what you may be thinking of. It spawns an actor that we can designate at a certain location and direction and everything like that. So that's exactly what it does. It's not hard to set up or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to spawn the enemy left-right actor, and we're going to spawn it in front of this actor, and we want to make sure that the direction is 0. It doesn't really matter for right now what this is set to, but just keep it at the default value, and we're going to make sure that it's relative to scene, and so is the position. Make that relative to scene. Now the position is an X and Y value, and so we don't want it to spawn at 0, 0. We want the plane to spawn right where this actor is located, and so we can open up the expression editor and select self position X for the X value, so it's going to spawn at the X location of this actor, and we want it to spawn at the Y location, so select enemy spawner, which is self position Y. And there we go right there. Now directly after we spawn this actor, we want to go ahead and change self.justSpawn to true, so that way after half a second it becomes false again, and then we get caught in this loop. So after it's false, this rule triggers. After a second, we spawn another plane. So we drag the change attribute into the timer, select enemy spawner, just spawned, and we set it to true. And there we go. We should now have a loop of spawning actors, and we're going to spawn the enemy left to right actor. So let me go ahead and drag this onto the scene. We'll go ahead and delete the planes that we added last video tutorial and everything like that. So we're just going to drag 2 different actors onto the scene right here where we want a plane to spawn, and we'll go ahead and preview. And you can see we can go ahead and you can see that the planes are spawning like they're supposed to, and you can actually see the random speeds applied to these planes. Some of them are moving faster while some of them are moving slower, but you may notice that they look very close together. They're spawning like exactly the same time, and that's not very cool because we want a kind of a random pattern here, and so we want them to show up randomly instead of in a pattern kind of like they're doing right here. So how do we fix that? Well, if you remember in the last video, we went over the random function inside of these planes, and so we're going to use that function again inside of the enemy spawner. If we go into the rule and timer here that spawns the actual actor, we have access to the expression editor, which allows us to insert functions into the expression. So we can go ahead and say after a random amount of time we want to go ahead and spawn an actor. And so if we go ahead and open up the expression editor by clicking the E, we can either type in random or select it from the drop down right here, which is what I'm going to do. And so we're going to say after a minimum of 1 second and a maximum of 4 seconds, go ahead and spawn this plane. And so it's going to choose a number between 1 and 4, and after that amount of time it's going to spawn the plane. So now if we go ahead and preview, you can see that this actor spawned first and this one spawned another one before this one did, and so it kind of gives that illusion, and it is actually randomly spawning these actors, and that's what we want. So that's pretty cool. And the reason why we use the random function is because it's easier for you to edit in the long term. We want you guys to be able to change the mechanic. If you want it to be harder, change the random function here to 1 and 3 seconds to make it harder so they're coming quicker. And so you can do that. But that only solves half of our problem because we're only spawning the actors on the left side of the screen. We also want planes to come in from the right. And remember that I said we created that self attribute so that way we could go ahead and distinguish the actors on the scene. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and edit the self attributes of these actors so that way we can tell each specific number to do something. So if we go in, like you might remember with the coins, we're going to go ahead and double click on these actors, and you'll see that self.which side is set to 1, which is actually what we want. We want that to be 1 for the left side and 0 for the right side. So if I go ahead and drag an enemy spawner on the right, like right here, and I go ahead and enter the actor, the instance of the actor, and change this to 0, now on the left side these self attributes are set to 1 and this one is set to 0. So now we can actually add that logic to the rules here. So we can say something like if self.which side equals 1, we want to spawn this actor. But if it equals 0, we want to spawn the enemy right-left actor. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and let's see. Go ahead and duplicate this rule. Let's go ahead and name it so it's easier to see. We're going to go ahead and double click on the name and name the rule. We're going to call it spawn. We're spawning the enemy left to right, so we'll just call it spawn left. And with the rule highlighted with that blue outline, we can go ahead and hold down Alt or Option and drag and release to create a duplicate of the rule. And we'll go ahead and name it spawn right. And so we can keep everything the same, except we want to change the spawn actor from enemy left right to enemy right left. Now what do you think that's going to do? We haven't put in the self.whichSide self attribute into the conditions of these rules. And so what's going to happen here is if I drag this actor onto the scene, you'll see it's going to spawn the actor that moves to the right and the actor that moves to the left. So you can just see it spawned a left actor and another one. And now it'll probably spawn a right actor here pretty soon. Yep, there it goes. And so that's what it's doing right now. So we need to make sure that we add that condition in our rule. And so if we go back into the enemy spawner, we can add a condition to this rule that says when self.justSpawned is false and when self which side equals 0. Because remember, on the right side, that self attribute equals 0, so we want to spawn the right actor to move left. And now if we close that one and go into the left rule, we can add another condition that will trigger when which side equals 1. And so now, with that simple addition of two conditions, we can go ahead and preview the scene, and you'll see that now we have actors coming in from both sides. And so that was pretty easy to go ahead and get our planes to spawn from either side of the screen. And so I'm going to wrap up the video here. In the next lesson, we're going to be going over some more mechanics and some pretty cool things. So be sure to stick around, and I'll see you in the next video.